The day after my wife's funeral, the house felt hollow in a way grief alone couldn't explain. The curtains still smelled like her soap. Her shoes were lined neatly by the door, toes pointed forward like she'd be back any minute. I was standing in the kitchen, staring at a chipped mug she loved, when my son cleared his throat behind me. He didn't cry at the funeral. He didn't cry now. He stood stiff, arms folded, eyes avoiding mine, as if grief were contagious. "Dad," he said, "we need to talk about the house." I remember nodding, slow and tired. I thought he wanted to talk about memories, or bills, or how we'd get through the quiet nights. Instead, he handed me an envelope. Inside was a typed notice, legal words, cold words, eviction. 30 days. I laughed at first. A short, broken sound. I thought it was some kind of mistake, or a joke that landed badly. "This is my house," I said. "Your mother and I." "It's my house now," he interrupted. "Mom transferred everything last year. You signed the papers." I tried to remember. The hospital room. The medications. The way she'd squeezed my hand and told me to trust her. I had signed without reading, because that's what love does when it's tired. "You can stay a month," he continued, voice flat. "After that, I need the place. Claire and I are moving in." Claire, his wife. The woman who had hugged me at the funeral and whispered, "We'll take care of you, Dad." I looked at my son, the boy I'd taught to ride a bike, the teenager I'd bailed out of jail at 2 a.m., the man who now couldn't meet my eyes, and something inside me went quiet. "I just buried your mother," I said. He exhaled sharply. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." 30 days later, I stood on the sidewalk with 2 suitcases and a cardboard box. My son locked the door behind me. He didn't hug me. He didn't even say goodbye. I slept that first night in my car. For weeks I drifted. Cheap motels when I had the money. A friend's couch when pride loosened its grip. Grief settled into my bones, heavy and aching. I talked to my wife in my head, asking her how this had happened, asking her if she'd known. 3 months passed. On a gray morning in early winter, I got a call from a storage facility across town. The woman on the line sounded nervous. "Sir, we're trying to reach the owner of Unit 314. The lease is under your wife's name. It's overdue." "My wife passed away," I said quietly. "I'm sorry for your loss," she replied. "We need to know if you want to clear the unit before it's auctioned." I didn't even remember the unit, but something in her tone made me pause. "Yes," I said. "I'll come today." Unit 314 was small, dusty, unremarkable. Inside were old boxes, filing cabinets, and a single metal case locked with a code. I recognized the case immediately. It was the one my wife never let anyone touch. I sat on the cold concrete floor and tried the only code I could think of, our anniversary. It clicked open. Inside were 42 flash drives, neatly labeled in her careful handwriting. Dates, names, notes. My hands shook as I picked one up and plugged it into my laptop. What unfolded over the next several hours unraveled my understanding of my own life. Emails, recordings, scanned documents, conversations secretly recorded in our living room, in hospitals, in my son's office. Claire's voice was everywhere, sharp, calculating, mocking. "I just need him out," she said in one recording. "Once the house is mine, I'll renovate and sell. Easy." Another file was my son's voice, quieter, hesitant. "He's my dad." Claire laughed. "He's old. He'll be fine. Or he won't. Either way, we can't wait forever." There were bank records, evidence of forged signatures, proof that my wife had discovered everything months before she died. And then, the last drive. A video. My wife sat on the edge of our bed, pale but steady, looking straight into the camera. "If you're watching this," she said, "then I'm gone. And if our son has done what I fear he will, then I'm sorry I didn't protect you sooner." She explained everything. How she'd realized Claire was manipulating him. How money had twisted love into something ugly. How she'd tried to confront them and been brushed aside. "I couldn't change him," she whispered. "But I could prepare." She told me what to do. Who to call. When to release the files. And then she smiled, soft and sad. "You deserved better. Now make sure the truth gets its turn." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I followed her instructions. Within 2 weeks, lawyers were involved. Authorities reviewed the forged documents. The recordings went public through the courts, then the media. The story spread fast. A grieving father evicted by his own son, only to uncover months of deception. The house sale was frozen. Assets were seized. Claire disappeared the moment charges were mentioned. My son lost his job first, then his reputation. Friends stopped calling. Doors closed. One evening, as I was unpacking boxes in a small but warm apartment, paid for by funds legally returned to me, there was a knock at the door. I already knew who it would be. My son stood there, thinner, eyes red, hands shaking. He fell to his knees before I could say a word. "I'm sorry," he sobbed. "Dad, I was wrong. She made me think. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't step back. I just listened." He begged. He promised. He said all the right words, the kind you learn when there's nothing left to lose. When he finally stopped, I spoke. "I buried your mother," I said. "Then I buried the son I thought I had." He looked up, hope flickering. "I forgive you," I continued. "But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. And it doesn't mean going back." I closed the door gently. 3 months later, he asked again. This time in a letter. Then again, and again. I never replied. Revenge didn't come with shouting or fists or flames. It came quietly, through truth, patience, and a woman who loved me enough to leave 42 small keys to justice behind. And in the silence that followed, I finally found peace. The eviction did not come as a loud argument or a dramatic confrontation. It arrived quietly, wrapped in polite words and legal language, which somehow made it hurt more. It was the morning after my wife's funeral, and the house still carried the weight of her absence. Her presence lingered in every corner, the faint scent of her perfume on the sofa cushion, the half-folded shawl on the chair, the photo frame on the wall that I couldn't yet bring myself to turn face down. I had barely slept. Grief had kept me awake, replaying her last smile, her last squeeze of my hand, her last whispered words telling me to be strong. I was standing in the kitchen, staring at the sink where she used to wash dishes while humming softly, when I heard my son's footsteps behind me. He didn't sound hesitant or unsure. His steps were firm, deliberate, like someone who had already made up his mind long before speaking. When he cleared his throat, the sound cut through the quiet like a blade. "Dad, we need to talk," he said. I turned slowly, expecting concern, maybe shared sadness. He was my son, after all. The boy I had carried on my shoulders, the teenager I had defended when the world seemed against him, the man I believed would stand beside me now that his mother was gone. But his face was stiff, distant. There was no warmth in his eyes, no trace of the grief that was tearing me apart from the inside. He handed me an envelope. At first I didn't take it. I smiled faintly, thinking it might be documents related to the funeral or insurance paperwork. My hands were still trembling from exhaustion and sorrow. When I finally opened it, the words inside felt unreal, as if they belonged to someone else's life. Eviction notice, legal terms, deadlines. My name printed neatly at the top, followed by a date that seemed cruelly close. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because my mind refused to accept it. "This is a mistake," I said. "This house is your mother and I built our life here." He shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable, but he did not deny it. "It's not a mistake," he replied. "Mom transferred the house to me last year. You signed the papers." I searched my memory desperately. Hospital corridors, doctors' voices blending into noise, my wife's fragile hand in mine. She had asked me to sign something back then, saying it was just to make things easier. I trusted her. I trusted my family. I never imagined trust could be used like a weapon. "You can stay for 30 days, my son continued, his tone sounding rehearsed, as if he had practiced this speech. "After that, Claire and I need the house." Claire. The name echoed in my ears. The same woman who had hugged me at the funeral, her voice dripping with sympathy, promising that family would always take care of each other. The same woman now quietly standing behind this decision. I felt something inside me crack, not loudly, but deeply. "I just buried your mother?" I said, my voice breaking despite my effort to stay calm. "And now you're throwing me out?" He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Don't make this emotional, Dad. It's just business, business." That single word erased decades of memories in an instant. All the nights I worked late so he could go to college. All the sacrifices his mother and I made without ever keeping score. Reduced to business. The days that followed blurred together. I moved through the house like a ghost, packing my life into boxes, while memories attacked me from every shelf and drawer. My son avoided me. When we crossed paths, our conversations were short and awkward, like strangers sharing a hallway. On the final day, I carried my suitcases to the front door. He stood there, keys in hand. There was no hug, no apology, no goodbye. When the door closed behind me, the sound felt final, like a coffin lid sealing shut. I stood on the sidewalk, my whole life reduced to what I could carry, watching the house that once held laughter, love, and family now stand cold and silent behind locked doors. In that moment, the pain of losing my wife collided with the betrayal of losing my son. I realized that grief does not always come from death alone. Sometimes, it comes from the living, those who choose convenience and greed over love. And as I walked away, I understood that the eviction wasn't just from a house. It was from a family I thought would never abandon me. The first night after the eviction, I sat in my car with the engine off, staring through the windshield at nothing in particular. The streetlight above flickered, casting long, tired shadows across the dashboard. I had parked a few blocks away from the house, not because I planned to go back, but because I wasn't ready to accept that I no longer belonged anywhere. The silence inside the car was heavy, broken only by the distant sound of passing traffic and my own uneven breathing. I rested my forehead against the steering wheel and felt the weight of everything finally press down on me at once. Grief had already hollowed me out. Losing my wife had taken the color from the world, but losing my home, and the son I thought I knew, stripped away whatever stability I had left. I didn't cry that night. Tears felt pointless, like another thing I could no longer afford. Instead, I sat there until the cold crept into my bones, reminding me that I needed to move, to do something, even if I had no idea where I was going. The days that followed became a quiet routine of survival. I learned quickly which motels charged by the night instead of the week, which ones didn't ask too many questions. I learned to keep my suitcases locked even when I slept, to trust no one, and to speak as little as possible. Pride kept me from calling old friends at first. I told myself they had their own lives, their own problems. The truth was simpler and uglier. I was ashamed. Ashamed that after a lifetime of working, of providing, of believing in family, I was now drifting like someone who had made every wrong choice. Each morning, I woke up with the same heavy realization, like being hit by a wave I couldn't escape. My wife was gone. My son had chosen to erase me. There were moments when the grief was so sharp it felt physical, like pressure on my chest. I would see her everywhere, in the way sunlight hit a window, in the smell of coffee from a diner, in the sound of a laugh that wasn't hers but close enough to hurt. I talked to her under my breath, asking her what I was supposed to do now, asking her how our son had become someone capable of this. Money ran out faster than I expected. I skipped meals, telling myself I wasn't hungry. I sat in public parks for hours just to avoid spending anything, watching families pass by, children running ahead while parents called after them with tired affection. I wondered when exactly my life had split in two, before and after betrayal. Nights were the worst. Sleep came in short, restless bursts, haunted by memories and questions that had no answers. Eventually, pride loosened its grip. I accepted a couch from an old coworker who didn't ask many questions. Even then, I felt like a burden, careful to leave early in the morning and return late at night. I kept my belongings neatly packed, as if staying ready to disappear at any moment. The sense of not belonging followed me everywhere, a constant reminder that I had been pushed out not just of a house, but of a role, a place in someone else's life. Through it all, my son never called, not once. No message asking if I was okay, no hesitation, no regret. That silence hurt more than the eviction itself. It told me everything I needed to know about how easily I had been replaced, how little my absence mattered. I replayed every moment of his childhood in my head, searching for the point where I had failed him, or where he had decided that love was conditional. There were moments, late at night, when darker thoughts crept in, thoughts about how simple it would be to stop trying, to let the exhaustion win. What pulled me back each time was my wife's voice, clear and steady in my memory, telling me that I was stronger than I believed. She had always been the anchor between our son and me, the one who softened conflicts, who reminded us of what family meant. Without her, everything had come undone. 3 months passed like this, quiet, humiliating, painful months that stripped me down to my core. I lost weight, I lost illusions. But somewhere beneath the grief and exhaustion, something else began to form. A hard, steady resolve. I didn't know yet what shape it would take or where it would lead me, but I knew one thing with certainty: I would not let my story end in a parking lot or on someone else's couch. I had been abandoned, yes, but I was still alive. And as long as I was breathing, the truth had not finished speaking. The call from the storage facility came on a morning that felt no different from the others, gray, cold, and heavy with the same dull ache that had settled into my days. I almost didn't answer. Unknown numbers had become something I avoided, usually reminders of bills I couldn't pay or obligations I no longer had the strength to face. But something made me pick up, and when the woman on the line mentioned my wife's name, my breath caught. She spoke gently, explaining that the unit was overdue and scheduled for auction. I hadn't known the unit existed, or if I had, it had slipped into the fog that followed my wife's illness and death. Hearing about it felt like touching a thread that led back to her. And I couldn't let it be cut. I told the woman I would come that same day. The storage facility was quiet, rows of metal doors stretching out like a maze of forgotten lives. When I unlocked the unit, a faint smell of dust and cardboard filled the air. Inside were boxes stacked neatly, far more organized than anything I had managed in months. That alone felt like her, methodical, thoughtful, always planning ahead. As I stepped inside, memories washed over me of the way she used to tuck important papers into labeled folders, saying one day we'd be grateful for her careful habits. In the back of the unit, half hidden behind old photo albums and filing cabinets, sat a metal case I recognized instantly. It was one of the few things she had ever told me not to touch. At the time, I had laughed it off, assuming it held surprise gifts or private letters. Now, my hands trembled as I pulled it forward. The lock was cold beneath my fingers, and for a moment, I hesitated, feeling as though opening it might change everything. I tried our anniversary date without much hope. The lock clicked open. Inside were 42 flash drives, each one carefully labeled in her handwriting. Dates, names, short phrases that meant nothing to me yet somehow felt heavy with purpose. My heart pounded as I picked one up and sat on the concrete floor, laptop balanced awkwardly on my knees. The first file took a few seconds to load, seconds that felt like an eternity. The voices came through clear and unmistakable. Conversations recorded in our own living room, in hospital waiting areas, in whispered phone calls late at night. Claire's voice was sharp, confident, stripped of the false kindness she had shown me for years. She spoke of plans, of timelines, of money. She laughed about how easily things were falling into place. Then my son's voice joined in, hesitant at first, then slowly more certain, more detached. I felt sick listening to it. Each file peeled back another layer of deception, revealing a plan that had been unfolding while I sat beside my wife's hospital bed, believing my family was united in love and concern. There were emails outlining forged documents, scanned signatures that mirrored my own handwriting too perfectly to be coincidence, and messages discussing how long they would need to wait after the funeral before handling me. Hours passed without me noticing. I moved from one flash drive to the next, my emotions shifting between disbelief, anger, and a hollow numbness that settled deep in my chest. The worst part wasn't the money or the house. It was hearing how casually I was dismissed, reduced to an obstacle, a problem to be solved once my wife was gone. Near the end, I found a folder labeled only with my name. Inside was a video file. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the drive as I clicked play. My wife appeared on the screen, sitting on our bed, her face pale but calm. She looked straight into the camera, the way she always did when she wanted to be sure someone was really listening. She spoke softly, explaining that she had discovered the truth months earlier, that she had confronted them, and realized too late how far things had gone. She apologized for not telling me sooner, for trying to handle it alone while protecting me from more pain. Then she told me what she had done instead. She had documented everything. Every lie, every threat, every manipulation. She had prepared the evidence not out of revenge, but out of love, determined that I would not be left defenseless. She told me where to take the files, who to trust, and when to act. Her voice wavered only once when she said she wished she had more time. When the video ended, I sat there in silence, the weight of her foresight pressing down on me. Grief surged anew, but this time it was tangled with something else, clarity. In that cold storage unit, surrounded by boxes of forgotten things, I finally understood that my wife had not abandoned me in death. She had seen what was coming, and had reached back from the edge of her own ending to make sure the truth would survive her. Those 42 flash drives weren't just evidence. They were her final act of protection, and the moment I closed that metal case, I knew my life was about to change. Once the shock settled, and the weight of what I had discovered began to sharpen into focus, I realized that grief alone could no longer guide my actions. What sat inside that metal case was not just a record of betrayal, it was a map. My wife had left me a path forward, carefully marked, and for the first time since the funeral, I felt something solid beneath my feet. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was choosing. I followed her instructions exactly, even when fear crept in. The first step was finding a lawyer she trusted, someone she had met quietly months before her health declined. Walking into that office with a backpack full of flash drives felt surreal, like I was carrying a lifetime of secrets on my shoulders. The lawyer listened without interrupting, his expression tightening as file after file played across his screen. When he finally leaned back in his chair, he didn't hesitate. "This is extensive," he said, "and it's damning." What followed was a process that demanded patience I didn't know I had. Every recording was verified, every document examined. The forged signatures were compared against genuine ones. Financial trails were traced, revealing money moved too cleanly, too deliberately, to be coincidence. Each discovery confirmed what my wife had already known. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a moment of weakness. It was a plan. As legal actions began, the tone of my life shifted again. Official letters replaced silence. Phone calls came in steadily. Investigators asked careful questions, and I answered them calmly. My emotions locked away where they couldn't interfere. I wasn't doing this out of anger anymore. I was doing it because the truth deserved daylight. When the first court filing became public, the story moved faster than I expected. A local reporter picked it up, then another. Headlines began circulating, each one more shocking than the last. A grieving father evicted after his wife's funeral. Secret recordings. Forged documents. The public reaction was swift and unforgiving. Sympathy poured in from strangers who had never known me, while scrutiny fell heavily on my son and his wife. Claire vanished almost immediately. She stopped answering calls, shut down her social media, and reportedly left town. My son, however, couldn't disappear so easily. His employer placed him on leave pending investigation, citing ethical concerns. Friends distanced themselves. Invitations dried up. The confident certainty I had heard in his recorded voice was replaced by panic and denial as he tried, unsuccessfully, to control the narrative. In court, the truth didn't need drama. It stood on its own. The recordings played in a silent room, each word echoing with consequences. The judge listened carefully, occasionally glancing at my son, whose shoulders seemed to shrink with every passing minute. The forged documents were declared invalid. The transfer of property was frozen. Financial penalties followed, along with criminal investigations that stretched far beyond the house itself. I watched it all from a distance, emotionally detached in a way that surprised even me. There was no triumph in seeing my son exposed, no satisfaction in watching his carefully constructed life collapse. What I felt instead was a steady, quiet resolve. This wasn't revenge in the way people imagine it. There were no raised voices, no dramatic confrontations. There was only accountability. As weeks turned into months, the consequences deepened. My son lost his job permanently. His professional reputation, once solid, became a liability. The house he had rushed to claim became a burden, tangled in legal restrictions and public scrutiny. The future he had planned so confidently unraveled piece by piece, not because I pushed it over, but because it had been built on lies. Through it all, I kept remembering my wife's face on that video, her calm certainty that truth, once released, would take care of itself. She had been right. I didn't have to destroy anyone. I only had to stop protecting their secrets. One afternoon, as I left the courthouse after yet another hearing, a reporter asked me if I felt vindicated. The question caught me off guard. I thought about the nights in my car, the humiliation, the loneliness, the disbelief that my own child had chosen this path. "I feel finished," I said finally. Finished being silent. That was the moment I understood what real justice felt like. Not loud, not cruel, just firm, undeniable, and long overdue. By the time my son came to see me, the storm had already passed. The legal battles were no longer front-page news, the reporters had moved on, and my life had settled into a quiet rhythm I hadn't known in years. I lived in a modest apartment with clean windows and warm light, a place that belonged entirely to me. I cooked simple meals, took long walks, and learned how to exist without bracing myself for the next blow. Peace, I discovered, was not loud or dramatic. It was steady, predictable, earned. The knock on the door came just after sunset. I knew who it was before I reached the handle. Some instinct, sharpened by months of disappointment, warned me. When I opened the door, my son stood there looking smaller than I remembered, like someone who had been carrying a weight too heavy for his frame. His eyes were red, his face drawn, his hands clenched and unclenched as if he didn't know what to do with them. He didn't speak at first. He just looked at me, and for a moment, I saw the child he used to be, the boy who once ran into my arms without hesitation. Then his knees buckled and he sank to the floor. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "Dad, I was wrong. I don't know how I became that person. I don't know how I let it happen. I didn't rush to lift him. I didn't step back either. I stood there, letting the silence stretch, because for once, silence belonged to me." He cried openly, shoulders shaking, words spilling out in a desperate rush. He blamed fear, pressure, love twisted into dependency. He blamed Claire. He blamed himself. He promised he would change, that he would make things right if I would just give him another chance. I lost everything, he whispered. My job, my friends, my marriage. You're all I have left. I listened, truly listened, without interrupting. Months earlier I might have felt my resolve weaken at the sound of his pain. But something inside me had changed. I had learned the cost of ignoring truth for the sake of comfort. I had learned that love without boundaries can quietly destroy you. When his words finally ran out, I spoke. I forgive you, I said. He looked up, hope flashing across his face, fragile and bright. You do? Yes, I replied calmly. I forgive you because carrying anger any longer would only poison what little peace I've built. I forgive you because your mother would have wanted that much. His shoulders sagged with relief, and for a brief second, he reached out as if to embrace me. I raised my hand gently, stopping him. But forgiveness doesn't mean restoration, I continued. It doesn't mean we go back to what we were. That version of us doesn't exist anymore. The hope in his eyes faltered. Dad, please, I need you. I needed you too, I said quietly. I needed you when I was standing on the sidewalk with my life in 2 suitcases. I needed you when I slept in my car. I needed you when silence was the only answer I got from my own son. Each word landed softly but firmly. I wasn't accusing him anymore, I was stating facts. I forgive you, I repeated, but I don't trust you. And without trust, there can't be closeness. He bowed his head, tears dropping onto the floor. He asked if we could start slowly. Occasional calls, dinners, something, anything. I shook my head. Distance is not punishment, I said. It's protection. For me, he stayed on the floor for a long time after that, as if hoping I would change my mind. When he finally stood, his movements were slow, uncertain. At the door, he turned back once more. I'll keep trying, he said. You should, I replied. Just not with me. After he left, I closed the door and leaned against it, breathing deeply. My hands shook, but not with doubt, with release. I had said the hardest words of my life without raising my voice or losing myself in anger. I had chosen myself, not out of bitterness, but out of self-respect. In the months that followed, letters arrived, long ones, apologetic ones, some angry, some hopeful. I read them once and placed them in a drawer I rarely opened. I did not reply. Silence, I had learned, can be a complete sentence. People often imagine revenge as something explosive, something that leaves ashes behind. But real power, I learned, comes from knowing when to stop, from refusing to beg for love that arrives too late, from understanding that forgiveness is something you give yourself first. I still miss my son, not the man he became, but the boy he once was. I hold that memory gently without letting it guide my choices. My wife's absence still aches, but her strength lives on in the life I rebuilt, one honest boundary at a time. And in that quiet, carefully protected space, I finally found something I thought I had lost forever: dignity. In the quiet that followed everything, the courtrooms, the apologies, the unanswered letters, I began to understand what my wife had truly left me. It wasn't just evidence or a plan or a way to reclaim what was taken. It was permission to live differently. For most of my life, I had measured myself by what I provided for others. Husband, father, provider, fixer. I wore responsibility like armor, believing that love meant endurance, that family meant sacrifice without limits. Losing my wife shattered that belief. Losing my son forced me to rebuild it from the ground up. My days became simple in a way that once would have terrified me. I woke up early, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I made my own breakfast. I took walks without rushing, noticing things I'd ignored for decades. The way light changes color as the day moves on. The sound of birds arguing in the morning. The comfort of routine that belonged only to me. There was no one to impress, no one to appease, no one to rescue from their own choices. At first, the quiet felt like loneliness. Old habits die slowly. I would catch myself reaching for my phone, thinking of someone to call, someone to update, someone to check on. Then I would remember how often my own calls had gone unanswered, how invisible I had felt when I needed support the most. Gradually, the quiet stopped feeling empty and started feeling honest. People around me had opinions, of course. Some said I was too harsh. Others said blood should matter more than anything. A few praised my strength, calling what I did revenge, as if that was the goal all along. I never corrected them out loud, but inside I knew the truth. Revenge is loud. It feeds on anger and spectacle. What I chose was smaller and harder. I chose not to return to a place where I had been discarded. I chose not to beg for love that only appeared when consequences arrived. Every so often, memories would ambush me. A birthday from years ago, A fishing trip with my son when he was still awkward and hopeful. My wife laughing at some small joke, her head tilted back, eyes closed. Those moments still hurt. Healing didn't erase them. It taught me how to carry them without letting them steer my life. I learned that missing someone doesn't obligate you to reopen a door that nearly destroyed you. The flash drives went back into the metal case, and the case into a closet. I didn't need to look at them anymore. Their purpose had been fulfilled. Justice had taken its course, not perfectly, not painlessly, but truthfully. The house, the money, the public reckoning, none of that mattered as much as the shift that had happened inside me. I no longer felt small. I no longer questioned my worth based on how others treated me. Sometimes, late at night, I imagined what my wife would say if she could see me now. I like to think she would smile. That quiet, knowing smile she had when things finally made sense. She had always believed that dignity was more important than being right, that peace was worth more than winning arguments. In the end, she gave me both, even in her absence. I began to volunteer at a local community center, not because I needed redemption, but because I wanted connection without expectation. I met people who carried their own losses, their own betrayals, and I saw how many of us confuse endurance with love. I listened more than I spoke. When I did speak, I didn't offer advice. I offered honesty. That sometimes, walking away is not failure. Sometimes it's survival. My son continued to exist somewhere beyond the edges of my life. I didn't wish him harm. I didn't follow his struggles or his attempts to rebuild. Letting go didn't require hatred. It required acceptance, that the person he was had chosen a path I could not walk without losing myself. Loving someone from a distance, I learned, can be an act of courage. The world didn't suddenly become fair. Pain didn't vanish. But my relationship with it changed. I stopped asking why this happened and started asking how I wanted to live with what remained. The answer was steady and clear, honestly, quietly, and without surrendering my self-respect. If there was a lesson in everything I endured, it wasn't about betrayal or justice or even forgiveness. It was about knowing when a chapter has ended, even if the characters are still alive. It was about understanding that peace is not given by those who hurt you. It is claimed the moment you stop asking them to be different. I didn't get my old life back. I got something better, my own.